were shocked and baffled that in the Commons yesterday you did not offer your Chancellor your support. Was it because you didn't see what was happening, or did you not know what to do? Thank you.
Well, Beth, let me just clear that up straight away. I didn't appreciate what was happening because, as you will probably appreciate, the PMQs is pretty wired. It goes from question to question, and I'm literally up, down, question, looking at...
Keir Starmer's hidden donations, the Labour Together scandal that could bring down a Prime Minister. Right. Before we dive into what might be the most explosive political scandal of Starmer's tenure, do us a favor and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to be first in line for what's coming next because this story has more twists than a Victorian melodrama, and we're only just getting started. Picture this. You're the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. You've spent months lecturing the nation about integrity, transparency, and doing politics differently. You've made your entire political brand about being the anti-Boris, the man who will clean up Westminster's murky waters. And then, like a polytime punchline, it emerges that you might have been playing fast and loose with the very rules you've been championing. Welcome to Keir Starmer's latest headache, and frankly, it's a migraine that could define his entire premiership. The story that's emerged isn't just another Westminster bubble controversy that'll be forgotten by next week's PMQs. This is about hundreds of thousands of pounds, hidden donations, think tanks with curious names, and the kind of behind-the-scenes maneuvering that would make House of Cards scriptwriters weep with envy. We're talking about Labour Together, a think tank that sounds innocuous enough but appears to have been pulling strings like a political puppet master, bankrolling Starmer's rise to power while somehow managing to stay completely off the official radar. Now, let's be absolutely clear about what we're dealing with here because the details matter. And they are damning. The Conservative Party, sensing blood in the water like sharks in a Westminster feeding frenzy, have announced they are launching a parliamentary inquiry into what they are calling a donation scandal involving one of Starmer's main allies. The allegation is straightforward and devastating. The Prime Minister failed to properly declare personal support in gifts from Labour Together, the very organisation that helped orchestrate his takeover of the Labour Party back in 2020. Here's where it gets juicy, and by juicy, I mean potentially career-ending. Labour Together allegedly spent hundreds of thousands of pounds on polling and research that was absolutely crucial to Starmer's leadership campaign. We're not talking about a few quid for some leaflets or a modest contribution to the Office Coffee Fund. This is serious money, the kind of financial backing that can make or break a political campaign, and yet somehow, mysteriously, none of this appeared on the Prime Minister's parliamentary register of interests. The rules for MPs are crystal clear, and they are there for a reason. Politicians must declare any support in kind worth more than £1,500. It's not a suggestion. It's not a guideline. It's a legal requirement designed to ensure transparency in our democratic system. Kevin Hollinrake, the Conservative Party chairman, isn't mincing words here. He's calling this another Downing Street cover-up. And given the current political climate, those are fighting words that carry serious weight. But here's where the plot thickens like a political thriller written by someone with an overactive imagination and a deep understanding of Westminster's darkest corners. The story involves Morgan McSweeney, a name that political insiders know well but the general public probably couldn't pick out of a lineup. McSweeney was a director of Labour Together until April 2020, when he conveniently left to become Starmer's chief advisor, both in opposition and now in government. Convenient timing, wouldn't you say? The Conservatives claim they've got their hands on leaked emails that paint a picture of deliberate deception and cover-up. According to these emails, McSweeney apparently tried to frame the late reporting of donations as nothing more than an administrative error, a bit of paperwork that got lost in the shuffle. He allegedly attempted to keep these regulatory breaches out of the media's spotlight, which, if true, suggests a level of political calculation that goes far beyond simple bureaucratic incompetence. The Electoral Commission, bless their hearts, eventually caught up with this mess and slapped Labour Together with a £14,250 fine in September 2021. The organisation had racked up nearly £750,000 in unreported donations. £750,000. That's not petty cash. That's not loose change found down the back of the sofa. That's serious political money that should have been declared and transparent from day one. The Conservative theory, and it's a compelling one, is that these donations were deliberately kept secret to prevent Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party from understanding who was bankrolling what they describe as secretive political campaigning. The idea was to keep this operation below the political radar, operating in the shadows while publicly maintaining the fiction that this was all above board and transparent. Now, you might be thinking, surely the Electoral Commission investigated this properly and got to the bottom of it? Well, yes and no. They investigated. They issued fines. But the Conservatives are alleging that Labour together concocted what they call a false excuse of administrative errors to minimize both the sanctions they face and the negative publicity that would inevitably follow. It's the political equivalent of claiming the dog ate your homework, except the homework in question involves hundreds of thousands of pounds and the future leadership of the Labour Party. The most damaging revelation comes from a new book that details Starmer's rise to power. According to this account, Starmer had a conversation about his leadership bid in a restaurant at the Royal Court Theatre with Steve Reed, who's now the Secretary of State for Housing, Communities and Local Government. They discussed Labour Together support for his campaign, which suggests this wasn't some peripheral relationship, but a central part of his political strategy from the very beginning. The book alleges that McSweeney and other senior figures from the think tank were actively involved in Starmer's leadership campaign, which raises serious questions about where the organization ended and the campaign began. Even more damaging is the claim that Jonathan Rutherford, one of Labour Together's founders, wrote significant portions of Starmer's first speech as Labour leader. If true, this means that the words that introduced Starmer to the nation as Labour's new leader weren't even his own, but were crafted by someone whose financial support he apparently forgot to declare. This isn't just about Starmer either. The web of connections extends to other senior Labour figures, including Rachel Reeves, who declared receiving research and writing services from Labour Together in 2021 and 2022. At least she followed the rules and declared the support, which makes Starmer's apparent oversight look even more suspicious by comparison. The timing of these revelations couldn't be worse for the Prime Minister. He has already been dealing with questions about his judgment and integrity, and this latest controversy goes to the heart of his political brand. Starmer positioned himself as a candidate who would restore trust in politics, who would do things differently, who would bring transparency and honesty back to Westminster. These allegations, if proven true, don't just undermine that narrative, they completely demolish it. The Conservative Party isn't letting this slide, and frankly, they'd be politically naive if they did. They are calling for a police investigation, which would take this beyond the realm of parliamentary procedure and into potential criminal territory. The phrase Downing Street cover-up is being thrown around with increasing frequency, and in British politics, once that narrative takes hold, it's incredibly difficult to shake off. What makes this particularly toxic for Starmer is that it strikes at the core of what he claims to represent. He has spent his entire tenure as Labour leader, and now as Prime Minister, presenting himself as the antithesis of the chaos and corruption that characterized the final years of Conservative rule. He has been the candidate of clean hands, of transparent governance, of doing politics properly. If it turns out that his own rise to power was bankrolled by undeclared donations and supported by organizations operating in the shadows, then his entire political identity crumbles. The question now isn't whether this story has legs, it's whether it has the power to bring down a sitting Prime Minister. We've seen political careers destroyed by less, and we've seen politicians survive scandals that seem far more damaging. The difference often comes down to how the public perceives a politician's response, whether they believe the explanations being offered, and whether the media decides to keep the story alive or let it fade into the Westminster background noise. Starmer's team will undoubtedly argue that this is much ado about nothing, that any failures to declare support were genuine oversights rather than deliberate deceptions, that the Prime Minister has always acted in good faith and within the rules. They'll probably point to the fact that the Electoral Commission investigated and issued fines, suggesting that the matter has already been dealt with through the proper channels. But here's the problem with that defense. Politics isn't just about legal compliance. It's about perception, trust, and narrative. Even if every technical rule was followed, even if every declaration was eventually made, the story that's emerging is one of a political operation that deliberately chose to operate in the shadows, that prioritized secrecy over transparency, and that may have given the current Prime Minister a significant advantage in his leadership campaign without the British public being aware of it. The broader implications of this scandal extend far beyond Starmer's personal political fortunes. If the allegations are proven true, they raise serious questions about how political campaigns are funded in this country, about the role of think tanks in shaping political discourse, and about whether our current regulatory framework is fit for purpose in an age of increasingly sophisticated political operations. Labour Together isn't some fringe organization run out of someone's spare bedroom. It's a well-funded, professionally run think tank with connections throughout the labor movement and beyond. The idea that an organization of this size and influence could operate for years without proper transparency, potentially shaping the outcome of a party leadership contest and ultimately influencing who becomes prime minister, should worry anyone who cares about democratic accountability. This story also highlights the increasingly blurred lines between legitimate political activity and what might be considered undisclosed lobbying or influence peddling. When think tanks provide research, polling, and strategic advice to political candidates, at what point does that support become substantial enough to require declaration? When does intellectual backing become financial support in kind? These are questions that our current regulatory framework struggles to address adequately. The timing of these revelations, coming as they do during Starmer's honeymoon period as Prime Minister, could not be more politically damaging. New governments typically get a grace period where they are judged more on their promises and their performance, where minor scandals are overlooked in favor of giving them a chance to deliver on their manifesto commitments. This scandal threatens to cut that honeymoon period short and establish a narrative of secrecy and potential corruption right at the beginning of Starmer's tenure. What's particularly damaging is that this isn't a scandal about something that happened while Starmer was in government, where you might argue that the pressures of office led to poor decision-making. This is about how he got to Downing Street in the first place, about whether his entire journey to the premiership was built on undeclared support and hidden financing. That's a kind of foundational challenge to legitimacy that's incredibly difficult for any politician to recover from. The Conservative Party's decision to call for a parliamentary inquiry and a police investigation shows they understand the potential political gold mine they've stumbled upon. They are not treating this as a minor procedural matter that can be resolved with a clarifying statement and an apology. They are treating it as a potential knockout blow, the kind of scandal that could define the early years of Starmer's premiership and potentially cut it short entirely. Of course, we should be cautious about accepting the Conservative narrative at face value. Opposition parties have a vested interest in making mountains out of molehills, in turning minor procedural breaches into major constitutional crises. They'll push this story as hard as they can, regardless of whether the evidence ultimately supports the most serious allegations. That's politics, and it's exactly what Labour would do if the roles were reversed. But even accounting for political opportunism and partisan exaggeration, the basic facts of this case are troubling enough to warrant serious investigation. The sums of money involved are substantial, the failure to declare support appears to be clear-cut, and the pattern of behavior suggests something more systematic than simple administrative oversight. The real test for Starmer will be how he responds to these allegations. Does he come clean about the full extent of his relationship with Labour Together, provide complete transparency about all the support he received, and demonstrate that any failures to declare were genuine mistakes rather than deliberate attempts to hide inconvenient truths? Or does he retreat behind legal technicalities, refuse to engage with the substance of the allegations, and hope that the story eventually goes away? His response will tell us a lot about the kind of prime minister he intends to be, about whether his promises of transparency and accountability were genuine commitments or just convenient campaign slogans. The British public has shown repeatedly that they are willing to forgive politicians who admit mistakes and show genuine contrition, but they are far less forgiving of those who appear to be covering up or dissembling. This scandal also raises important questions about the role of think tanks in modern British politics and whether they are operating with sufficient transparency and accountability. Labour Together is just one of dozens of organizations that seek to influence political discourse and policymaking, often with significant financial resources and political connections. If they are providing substantial support to political campaigns without proper declaration, then our entire system of political transparency is undermined. The Electoral Commission's investigation and subsequent fines suggest that there were indeed serious regulatory breaches, but the relatively modest penalties imposed raise questions about whether the current system of sanctions is adequate to deter this kind of behavior. A £14,000 fine might sound substantial, but for an organization that was dealing with hundreds of thousands of pounds in undeclared donations, it could easily be seen as just a cost of doing business. Looking ahead, this scandal has the potential to overshadow much of Starmer's early agenda as Prime Minister. Instead of focusing on delivering his manifesto commitments and establishing his government's priorities, he'll be forced to spend time and political capital defending his integrity and explaining his past associations. That's not where any new Prime Minister wants to be, particularly one who came to power promising to restore trust in politics. The media attention the story generates will also be crucial in determining its ultimate impact. If it becomes a daily drumbeat of negative coverage, with new revelations and fresh angles keeping it in the headlines week after week, then it could prove fatal to Starmer's political standing. If it turns out to be a one-week wonder that quickly fades from public attention, then he might weather the storm with his authority intact. The opposition parties will certainly do everything they can to keep this story alive, but they'll need more than just political opportunism to sustain it. They'll need evidence, witnesses, documents, and a narrative compelling enough to capture and hold public attention in an age where political scandals compete with countless other distractions from media coverage. What we're witnessing could be the beginning of a defining moment in Starmer's premiership, the scandal that either destroys his credibility or, if he handles it skillfully, demonstrates his ability to survive political adversity and emerge stronger. History is littered with politicians who seemed untouchable until they weren't, who appeared to have weathered their worst crises only to be brought down by something seemingly minor that captured the public imagination. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for Starmer personally, but for the broader political landscape. If a sitting prime minister can be brought down by allegations about undeclared support during a party leadership campaign, it sends a powerful message about the importance of transparency and accountability in British politics. It also raises questions about how thoroughly we vet our political leaders and whether our current systems are adequate to ensure public confidence in democratic institutions. This story isn't going away anytime soon, and neither should your attention to the unfolding political drama that could reshape British politics. The next few weeks will be crucial in determining whether Keir Starmer can survive this challenge to his integrity and continue as Prime Minister, or whether we're witnessing the beginning of the end of his political career. Make sure you're subscribed to UK Connors, because this story has more chapters to come, and you won't want to miss a single twist in what could become one of the most significant political scandals of the decade. The Game of Thrones continues, and in British politics, winter is always coming for someone.